This modification would allow you to use differential lock in all three transfer case ranges, super low, low, and high. Suzuki did not intend for this option. This video is for educative and entertainment purposes only. There is a 1999 Suzuki LT-300-F King Quad, and I want the option of using differential lock in all three sub-transmission ranges. So, getting right down to it, the first thing we'll want to do is remove the seat. Next, I use a Phillips screwdriver to remove the range selector knob, the reverse actuator knob, and finally the differential selector knob. Be careful not to lose the small screws. Next thing, I want to remove the cover that goes over all three shifting levers. There's two screws here that are normally hidden by the seat, and you crank the handlebars to reach number 3. Crank the handlebars the other way to reach the 4th and final Phillips head screw that holds the cover on. Now you should remove the fuel cap. Place it aside momentarily. And then the cover should come right off. There we go. I'm going to put that fuel cap back on just so nothing drops into the tank. I'm going to release the small clamp here that holds all of the vent hoses up in position next to the air snorkel. And I'm going to tie those back with a zip tie just so they're out of my way. And here's a 10mm screw or bolt, we could call it, that holds the snorkel to the frame. I'm going to remove that completely. And then I go back to where the airbox is and I loosen the two airbox clamps. You do not have to remove them, just loose is good enough so that you can move the snorkel out of the way. There's the 4 bolts we're going to want to remove in order to take the shifting mechanism off the frame. I get those loose with a 10mm socket. And here's the 4th one that the snorkel is kind of in the way, but I'm sure you can get to it. And now I completely remove all 4 of these bolts. And it might help to use needle nose pliers to get them out of there. Next step is to remove the small E-clip holding the cable onto the range selector knob. I'm just using a small straight pick to pry that off. Be careful it doesn't go flying away, otherwise you'll be going to the hardware store to get a new one. I pulled the pin and now the cable is loose from the range selector shaft. Number 16 and number 14 on this picture are what we're going to remove next. A nut and washer. I hold the other end of the bolt and I use a 12mm combination wrench to remove the nut that goes through the entire actuator and selector mechanism. According to the articles I've read, there's possibly a rubber washer, but that did not come off. It didn't give me any trouble. So I just removed the nut and the washer, which will then allow me to lift the mechanism up and remove the range selector shaft by pushing the bolt in and pulling the shaft right off. Place that aside. Now I'm going to push the differential selector up into the differential lock position so that we can expose this little pin right there next to my thumb. That is what we want to remove. I moved the lever back and forth a few times, and that pin just slid out far enough where I could actually grab it with my fingers. You might need a small magnet or needle nose pliers, or you might get away easy like I did. We take that pin out, and that's it. We go on to reassembly. First by installing the range selector shaft. I put that on, push the bolt through. Then I reinstall the washer and the 12mm nut. Then I want to reinstall the entire selector mechanism back to the frame. So I want to put those 4 bolts back into position. Here again, you might want to use needle nose pliers to place them in. And I like to make sure I get all 4 started before I tighten any of them down, just to make sure that everything lines up right. I didn't use a torque wrench, but I just snugged them down fairly tight. There it is. Now let's reattach that cable to the range selector. I line it up, I push the pin through, then I reinstall that E-clip. And here again, I'm just going to use that small straight pick that I used to remove it. Once it's on, double check, make sure everything is secure. Looks good. Now I want to put the bolt back in that holds the air tunnel. 10mm combination wrench. And the snorkel is attached to the frame. And now I go back and reattach the bottom of the snorkel to the air box and tighten up those 2 clamps nice and snug. I'll reroute my vent hoses back up next to the snorkel, which run up next to the fuel cap. And I just reuse the factory hold downs. Now here I took all the levers and moved them to the most vertical position I could find. Remove the fuel cap one more time. Place it in a clean spot. And then reinstall the selector cover. Oops, forgot to put that cap back on there. I'd hate to drop a screw into the fuel tank. And these again are all Phillips head screws. I turn the handlebars first right, then left to gain access. Now let's reinstall the shift knobs. In my case, I installed the differential selector knob first with the Phillips screw. Beautiful, nice and secure. Repeated the process with the reverse actuator knob. And finally the range selector knob. All these selectors seem to work a lot easier now. I reinstall the seat, and there we're going to show you a close-up of the pin that we removed. You now have access to differential lock in super low, low, and high range. Thanks for watching.